now that we have everything set up to check to see when we need to either add the user to the cache or remove him to the cache, we now have to disable their account if they have exceeded the number of times we allow them to try to log in within the specific 15 minutes window that we allow them. So let's go over to the implementation, and let's go into the user service implementation, and let's bring in the login attempt service. So I'm going to do private login attempt service, and I'm also going to pass it into the constructor so that I can wire the bean. So I'm just going to copy this, pass it in the constructor, and I'm just gonna do the same thing here. So this login attempt service equals login attempt service. So we have the login attempt service wired into the user implementation. So in the load user by username, which is the method that's going to be called by Spring Security to load the user by that username, we have to wait until we successfully find a user. So if we didn't find a user, that means that the username that they passed in was incorrect. In that case, we're not going to do anything because that's not a user in our system. However, just as a side note, you might want to just not allow anyone to try to access your system, whether or not they have the correct username. Because what I'm doing here is to make sure that to only concern myself with lacking the account if it's an actual user in my system and they're just, missing the correct password. So if the username is correct, I know this is someone in my system. So the potentiality of, that person, if it's a malicious user breaking into my system is already like 50% done, because that's actually a user in the system, because I'm able to find that user. And that's when I want to jump in to say, hey, I can't let this person try as many different passwords as they want because they already have the username right. So that's just one way to do this. There's another way to do it, is to just check to make sure that nobody is trying to bombard your actual system. So you might want to block anyone whether or not they got the correct username, as long as they're just sending multiple requests and then trying to brute force your system. But in our case, we're only going to concern ourselves whenever we have an actual hit for a username, meaning we know that's someone in our system, and then at this point the hacker or the malicious user is just trying multiple different passwords to break into our system. So here we're gonna add our validation just to check to make sure that the user is not already locked, or if they have exceeded the number of times we allow them to try to log in within the 15 minutes. So before we let this method finish executing so that it can return this user to Spring Security, so that Spring Security can do other checks like checking the password, because at this point on this method, Spring Security is just looking for the user and then returning that user. It's not checking for all the other stuff yet, like if the account is active or enabled, or if the password match. So at this point, it's just looking for the user. So once we know we have a successful user, which is going to happen right here on line 55, I'm going to add another method. So I'm going to call it validate user, maybe validate login attempt. Okay, and then here I'm gonna pass in the user. Okay, and I'm gonna create this method right now. So in this method, what we're going to do is to just check to make sure that the user is not locked, like the account is not already locked. So if the user is not locked right here, and if their account is not locked, right, their account is not locked, then I don't really have anything else to do. I'm just gonna remove them from the cache just to be safe. So I'm gonna go here and then call the login attempt service, and then I'm gonna call evict from cache, pass the user, get username. Okay, so if their account is not locked, okay, so if that's false, they're not locked, then I don't have to do anything. Their account is not locked. I'm just gonna let this go through. But if their account is locked, right, I'm gonna check to see if they have exceeded the 5 times that I allowed them. So I'm gonna do if, and then I'm gonna call the login attempt service again, and then I'm gonna call as exceeded, and I'm gonna pass in the username. Okay, so the system is gonna go in here and check to see if they have exceeded the 5 times. So at this point, if they have, then we can set the account to be locked, so false. Okay, so we set the not locked to false, so that means the account is going to be locked. However, if the account is not locked and they have not exceeded their max attempt, then again we're gonna say, okay, well, all right, then this account should be not locked. So we're gonna do user dot set not locked, and we're gonna set this to true, okay, because it's not locked. Okay, so again, just to recap, here we're gonna call this method as long as Spring Security, you know, found a user, and it's gonna return that user. So at the end of this method right here, this method is going to return this user by Spring Security, because at this point, this method is only looking for the user by the username. It's not checking to see if the account is active or if the account is locked or anything like that, which is why we anticipating that and then put our check right here before the method returns the user. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. So then we check to see if the account is not locked. If the account is not locked, this is going to be false. So the system is going to jump to this else statement, and then just to be safe, remove the user from the cache if they were ever in the cache. Okay, so that's not always going to be true. It might just go and look, didn't find the user, still fine. Find the user, remove it from the cache because their account is not locked. But if their account is locked, right, and then they have exceeded the amount of times we allow them to log in, then we lock the account. So we set not locked to false, which means it's locked now. Otherwise, we set not locked to true, which means now it's not locked. So we have to add this to the signature of the method. So let's do add exception. And I think we have to do it here. Well, I don't really want to throw this exception, which has nothing to do with this method and every method that's going to call this. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this here. And I'm going to go back into the login attempt service, and I'm going to go ahead and remove all of those in the signature of the method, and then put a try catch block. That way I don't have to add it to the signature to every other method. So I'm going to go here, more action, surround try catch, and same here, more action, surround with try catch. Okay, so I can just do that instead. That way I don't have to keep adding this exception to the signature of the methods when they have actually nothing to do with that. So that should do the trick for us. And this is complaining. We can just return false right here. Return false. Okay, so that should do the trick for us. That way we don't have to keep adding that exception everywhere we call one of those methods. So we can actually just let's go here and then remove this as well. That don't matter anymore. We don't have to add it to the signature of this method because we have a try catch block, which is what we just did. So what we just did here. Okay, so see, if we have a try catch, then we don't need to add the signature. So at this point we should be ready to test this. So we're gonna go ahead and try to log in multiple times with the wrong password, and the system should lock the account and then tell us, hey, you need to call an admin to unlock the account. And you can proceed with that however you want. You might give them like maybe after a certain amount of time, or maybe 5 minutes, then you unlock the account. Maybe you have a batch job that runs and find all the accounts that are locked and then unlock them. However you want to manage it, but at least I'm showing you how this can work in a very practical way.